What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Heck versus Hell, where the truth we tell. Yes, welcome. Thank you for joining us today. If you are listening to this whenever it came out, Happy New Year still. Thank you for continuing this journey with us. Thank you for being here along the way. Even if you're not new here or listening to this when it came out, thank you regardless for being here along the journey with us so that we can continuously grow and elevate together, all for the glory. Of course, special thank you for the whole team and really for Lex for making this all happen, giving me the keys to the HVH. So we gotta all give thanks to her to be able to be to for the privilege of hearing this episode right now. Okay, so let me not go on too far, but if you are here at the time of the release, you may notice we do have a little bit of stagnation whenever it comes to the frequency of episodes going down a little bit, and that is all due to unforeseen circumstances which were not predicted at all. And also, as you can probably tell and hear, my voice is barely coming back. Okay, I'd say it's maybe 70% there, maybe 80. It's coming back. Took me a little bit of while. I was disappointed in it as well. I couldn't even, get louder than a whisper. My whisper was louder than my actual voice for a little bit of time. So, I'm here. All right, we're here now. There's progress. So let's, you know what? Let's just kind of get into it. All right. Wherever it is that you're listening to this on, love every single one of you. I haven't done this in a minute, so it is a little, let's just go. All right, let's just go. Keep the mistakes in. But welcome once again. And as you can very well see, this episode is called Choose Your Level. And I believe Lex had actually done an episode about this not too long ago. And as I mentioned, she is going through a couple things. It is a process, unforeseen situations. Go show her some love, send some love to the email. You know, it's coming along. I don't want to say too much. I don't want to give too much details or even too many hints as to what it could be, but just send love, send prayers um, in these hardships. Essentially, if she wants to come on, once this hurdle is over, well, and explain it, drop her own knowledge. I want to give her that privilege. I don't want to just put her on Front Street and let everybody know, oh, well, let me spill the tea, right? I don't want to do that. I want to show her the privacy and respect she deserves. But that is something that we are currently having an issue with right now at this moment. But she had actually done a similar episode like this, and she kind of beat me to the punch. She beat me to the punch. Hers was "What's Your Channel?" So it's a little bit different, but it's still the same concept in how we are meant to operate in the certain things that we are meant to operate in. Now, this is the second time I'm recording this because the first time the audio recorder that I was using supposedly went and picked up all the information, had the whole 30-minute episode, and it decided to go haywire, and that video is gone, or that audio is gone. So we don't have that anymore. There was some things in there that I really wanted to hear. However, technology. And I'm shaking my fist at technology right now, all right? But it is always something, right? If we're not getting attacked, we ain't doing the right thing. I'll tell you that much. But what's your channel? The one that Lex had done in the past. It wasn't too long ago. I want to say a couple months ago. Could be a couple years ago now that you're listening to this. But it was essentially talking about the certain channel we are on and where your mind is at, where your heart is at, so that you can tune in to certain frequencies and allow yourself to hear the voice of God. Now, I say that similar to this one because, in a different matter, I want to say that this is choosing your level. Okay, so choosing the level in which you decide to operate in. And there's so much talk about certain frequencies that people operate in. If you are aware and have delved into those conversations or have had certain coaches or teachers of a certain caliber, right? There are things like that. Excuse the dog in the background. Sorry, I can't do nothing about that. That is not my dog. There are certain people that teach this type of stuff whenever it comes to things just like that. Whenever it comes to something being a certain frequency and having the frequency of you operate in, I believe it's Scientology stuff. I'm gonna be honest with you. However, we very much know there is a lot of truth to so many things, okay? And this is something that now that I'm recalling, I actually mentioned this. The first like 15 minutes of that was me going into this understanding. The understanding that the foundational principles that are instilled within the Bible are the deepest things we can get to, the deepest truth we can get to in order to form everything, in order to form the foundation of who we are and how we are meant to operate in, right? So, one other thing, though, however, is the fact that there is a lot of other sources of information which may generally and overall be falsehood, be divination, be whatever you want to call it. But there's still aspects to truth in everything. Now, I'm not saying everything of an aspect is a truth, but there's aspects to truth in everything. And you can learn from that. Okay? And one of the biggest examples that I could give you is the understanding of gravity, right? We have certain perspectives, and gravity is one of the biggest ones. Gravity is a very vital understanding that everybody understands. If you go and you let go of something high in the air, it's going to fall towards the earth, right? It's going to fall down. And that's something we have common ground on. Now, when it comes to belief systems, that's where it can go and get everybody has their own understandings about the world, how they perceive life. Okay, and that's where we're going to go into when it comes to choosing your level. When it has to do with certain divisions and certain portions where it may not look to be true, you gotta always remember that God's foundation was what created this world. So even though it is flesh and that dominion was given to the adversary, God was still the overall one that created it. Now, there are certain powers as well of authorities that were given from God to these entities, to these things, and really to us, because our faith is what moves it. Our faith in that substance, in that entity, in that deity, in that idol, whatever you want to call it, whatever it is that you have faith in, that is our power, our power to make it come true, right? And that's where we can go into Scientology as well. So a lot of what we can look at, and this is why I like Scientology to an extent, because don't clip that, hear me out. I say that because they understand the scientific understandings and breakdowns to be able to properly comprehend what the Bible and biblical principles speak of, what Christ spoke of, whenever it comes to the reticular activating system, whenever it comes to the law of attraction, right? These are all things that Christ already spoke of. So that foundation is already there. So what we can do is we can bring these things and bring them into the biblical principles. Now, one of the biggest things too that you may or may not know is that these people that do that, all they do is they take God's spiritual laws and they take God out of the equation, right? So that's, of course, I don't like that at all, as you maybe don't either, right? But they also understand that you have to live ethically. That's one of the words that they use. We'll call this one guy M. There was a certain skill that I was learning from a guy named M. Okay, I was very attentive and very much listening. This guy named M, he was teaching me sales, actually. So M was teaching me sales and was putting his understanding, his belief system, and it was very interesting because that's one of the first times I heard about that. But one of their basic foundations is also that you have to live a moral life. You have to live ethically, right? As I just mentioned. And this comes from obviously the principles of what God said. So it's you can't lie, cheat, steal, you can't do bad because you will reap what you sow, right? We understand it as reap what you sow. They understand it as karma, or they understand it as you get the same energy you put out. Whatever they want to call it, they just dumb it down into, whatever. But that is one of the things that was very crucial in how I was able to understand that and how I was able to see. I'm like, okay, this is truth because I was very open minded. I had to be so I could learn that skill. Now, overall, so many sales tactics, so many sales people that teach that practice, they all they do is manipulation. I'm gonna be honest with you. You know, I don't like it. There are certain things that I was able to learn in terms of communication, but for the most part, the real blessing that came from it was meeting Lex through it. I'll tell you that much. But that's conversation for a whole nother day. However, there is a lot that we can learn from these different places, these different sources. Now, I'm not saying go out and actively seek these things, but I want you to go out there and have a certain type of open mind, right? I don't want you to go and just take everything in and believe it to be true, but I want you to have that discernment while having the open mind to be able to have a conversation civilly with these different people. Now, of course, there will be not an agenda, but a goal on your end in terms of, making sure they turn away from their own mal things, wrong things, whatever it may be. But we can very much understand, like we did in that episode about the shrewd manager. Actually, you haven't heard that yet, maybe. But as we did in that episode of the shrewd manager, Luke 16, it speaks about how we can learn things from the people of this world. Right, there's a lot that we can learn from the people of this world, people that gain an ungodly gains, people that go and do ungodly things. There's still different things that we can learn from these people in order to prevail and properly work for the kingdom of God. Of course, everything is with discernment. Okay, I cannot stress that enough. With discernment, we have to have a certain amount of understanding, and we have to have that principle first and foremost. You can't go and barely be on your journey with God and then go and, well, let me dive into witchcraft to find out what's the truths in those. No, not at all. Don't do that. That could be very bad for you potentially, especially if you're not properly covered with the armor of God and the understanding of that relationship and authority. Because a lot of the times, people that barely begin the journey, they don't have that faith to understand the authority because they are barely becoming that new creature. So, that being said, this is more so for people of that caliber that have gotten to that certain point in your walk. However, I will say, and very importantly, so that everyone can understand this and understand where I am coming from, we all have different perspectives. And that's one of the biggest things, too, whenever it comes to these people in these different realms, in these different spaces. It's all about perspective. And if you notice, and this is where it can also be put as a form of understanding, and just like these situations that I just gave you, these examples that I just gave you, one of the common grounds that we can have is gravity. But even in gravity, the perspective can be different. We can all agree that something falls when you drop it, right? Whenever you let go of it. We can all agree on that. It doesn't matter if you are out of the world in the sense of you have never been exposed to any type of world at all, or you've been through life and back, you've been around the world bazillion times. It doesn't matter where you are in your journey. That is something that we can all agree on. However, if you take it from a more elevated perspective, you can have a different perspective in understanding, okay, well, not everything falls down. Now, what do I mean by that? There are certain people that don't understand the concept of gravity, whether they don't understand it or they just haven't learned it yet, right? They are really secluded from the world. We, however, that do know and are familiar with gravity, we know that if something falls, if we let go of something, it's really the gravitational pull from the earth, right? Of course, we can go into moons and sun and all that stuff. We're talking about the earth right now. So we understand that that's that gravitational pull. And if we have a certain perspective, because I know there's some flat earthers out there, not going to bash you, I'm not going to shame you, but let's assume that the world is spherical as we are taught it to be. Let's assume that it is. If we look at it from an elevated perspective, we can say that things can also fall up. What the heck do I mean by that? I mean, like right now, I am in Texas of the United States of America. On the other side of the world, whether that be China or Australia, they drop something, and since it is a sphere, they are literally on the other side of the world. And whenever they drop something, essentially for me, it's falling up. Now, it sounds a little complicated. It sounds a little like, well, no, because if you'd be standing over there. But at the same time, if we take it from the exact position where I'm at, and I was teleported to the exact position where somebody on that part of the world is, I would be upside down. And I'd probably be standing on my head or something, because of that atomic understanding of direction. Okay, where my current molecules and matter are placed at right now are directly upside down to someone else, and rather the same way for them. They are completely upside down for me, meaning things fall upwards on that side of the world for me. Now, once I get over there, they're gonna fall the same, but people right here in America for me. So, I can go and you can explain these types of logics. You can go and go off of these forms of different understandings, thinking outside the box. Now, I won't say that's exactly an elevated perspective, just because I don't really want to associate something like that with God whenever it comes to something that could have so much argument or anything like that. But that is not the conversation we are entirely here to have right now. The conversation that we are here to have has to do with the level of frequency in which we operate in, and that is one thing that I wouldn't say I learned from that guy M, because he didn't understand it. I asked him directly one time, to explain frequency. He couldn't really do it. He was just like, "Oh, it's the level in which you operate in." I'm like, "All right, well, that gives me nothing." I'm like, "Well, how do you raise your frequency?" And he's like, "Well, you find people with a higher frequency than you and you get around them, and that ultimately raises your frequency." And I'm like, "That still doesn't tell me anything, because what?" It's like you're not explaining to me what a chair is, right? And that Matt Walsh understanding, if you know that whole conversation that Matt Walsh talks about whenever he comes talking about what is a woman, it's that circle of reason where he's not telling me what it is. So he didn't really explain it to me, but he did open me to it. He did open me to the understanding of it. However, one person that really understood it was Bob Proctor. And that is someone that I haven't really learned from, but I do understand that man did really understand it. And he got it from that book, Think and Grow Rich. And Think and Grow Rich is the same thing. And one of the main focal points when it comes to different entrepreneurs and really successful people, because they read it and they get those kingdom principles from it. to be able to create their reality. And ultimately, frequency, to simplify it a little bit, is the belief systems in which you have, and they allow you to operate on a different level than another person. So, let's say, for example, someone that is living in a mindset of poverty, they're always trying to think, how can I save my money? What can I do to not spend this type of money? And there's those cheapskates, right? I don't know if y'all have ever seen that show, the cheapskates, extreme cheapskates or something like that, where they're literally penny pinching and, finding different ways of saving money. Now that's interesting because they get creative, really. Some of the times they get really creative and they find different loopholes of how to go about it. However, their mind is constantly focusing on how to save money, the little money that they don't even have. And as opposed to people that are living in a, you know, world where they have a lot of money, their mindset is over here thinking differently, whether it be how can I help and bring more value to more people, or they're thinking how can I make more money? How can I place my money somewhere or park it somewhere so that it can create more money and I have more passive income coming in. These are the type of thoughts that differentiate, and it's those thoughts, of course it comes from that belief system. Of course it comes from that very different belief system of one person is thinking money is very scarce. I say scarcity, scarce. Um, but money is very scarce. So they believe that, they're trying to hold on to as much as they can. And the other person, they have a belief system where it comes to money is just a tool. Your money has to flow in order to keep things moving and keep things running. You have to understand, and they have a more of a comprehension of how money operates. So in the world, they are operating as on a different frequency than someone that is living in that cheapskate mindset, right? And that's one of the biggest things is how they view money in the first place. Now, this conversation really has nothing to do with money. This conversation is mostly for the understanding of the responsibility that we allow ourselves to take and hold in this world. Because we have to understand, whenever I first started out my journey, I believed that it really didn't matter what I did because regardless, God was going to put me where He wanted me to be. It doesn't matter what decisions I make because ultimately those are the will of God. Now, obviously, that kind of took away my free will a little bit, and it also deferred the understanding of predestination. So ultimately, that also messes with the concept of free will and the understanding of free will. And that's where I started off. So my belief system was, okay, well, it doesn't matter what I do, so I can do whatever I want because God is going to place me where He wants me to place. That's whenever I was first walking with God. I first started my journey with it. Of course, I've come a long way, but it is something like that where we have to be able to take responsibility and know that there is such a partnership with God that we have to hold because in this world, we were given dominion over it. That is very crucial to understand. Our identity is God, God-like, in God's image, right? That is our identity. That is how we have to perceive ourselves. Whenever it comes to Christ, the way He came down into the world and allowed us to say, your Father and my Father, our Father, essentially means we are siblings with Christ, with God. We are one with God, just as Christ is one with the Father, right? Obviously, still don't think it in an arrogant thing and say, okay, well, sit down, little bro, or something like. Don't do that. Don't do that at all. But it's the understanding of knowing that we are connected to God because through the branches, the vine bears fruit. So in this world, and that's one of the biggest things that Christ spoke about, is that relationship, that unionship. Our prayers, even whenever we pray, it talks about thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven, right? But one of the biggest ports is we have to go, even through our prayers, we are inviting the kingdom of heaven into this world. So it is a partnership that we have. It is a partnership that we have to do. Now, the dangerous part about it also is that on one hand, God, your success is very crucial in how you're represented, because you are ultimately representing God in how you succeed in life. So it's a little harder to fail on a certain aspect. It's very, very difficult to slide back into the world once you actually truly have the love of God and the Holy Spirit within you, because the conviction is so strong that you can go and think, if I wanted to, I could go and do XYZ. Yes, you could, but it's very, very difficult because of that conviction. And that's one of the things too, is God, he still allows us to do it, but it's that partnership, it's that oneness. So we have to take a lot of responsibility whenever it comes to bringing God's will to fruition. We're a huge part of making sure that God's will be done. Now, there are very few moments, if you actually look at the history book, the ultimate history book, there are very few moments where God actually intervenes. And that is because we were given dominion over this world, and because we have to be in one in alignment with God in order to bring his will into the world. And most of the times it is a partnership. Even whenever it comes to Moses, one of the things whenever Moses that I really love is the portion of where he goes and he raises his hands whenever they're having a battle. And every time he dropped his hands, the Israelites would be losing, but if he held them up, they would be winning. And then there was people that had to come on each side of him and help him hold his hands up, because they're like, well, you gotta let us win. You gotta help us win. But even whenever it came to freeing the Israelites, whenever he told, I'm gonna or go to Pharaoh, right? He told Moses to go to Pharaoh. God can do anything. God could have just appeared to Pharaoh and said, hey, you're gonna let my people go. Like, that's what you're gonna do. These are my people. You don't touch my people. No, it was a partnership that had to take place in that portion, right? And literally just about any place there is a partnership, because ultimately that's where the beginning also was. The intended creation of this universe was to have that partnership, to have that unity of heaven and earth. Heaven and earth were once one. Now it got split once we were kicked out of the Garden of Eden. So that partnership still has to become one in order to have that place of serenity, that kingdom of heaven. Right now, it gets deep. Okay, we can go on that conversation for a long time too. However, the main understanding is that we have to take responsibility for bringing our purpose, what we were created to do, into this world. God will have a huge hand in it, and God will make it so difficult for you not to succeed. However, you have to be doing the right things. Because if we look at it from that aspect of thinking, okay, well, God, take the wheel. I don't know where you want me to go. I'm going to just close my eyes and, walk. That's cool. It's blind faith, and if you do have that kind of faith, that's awesome. However, we still have to make the moves. We still have to take that step in order to walk in that direction. Okay, and that's very crucial to understand, is we have a lot of responsibility whenever it goes on to what happens in this world. And that is what so many people don't understand, even whenever it comes to nowadays churches. They just believe, okay, well, God said it will be done, so it will be done. And they're just constantly waiting and waiting and waiting for God to do it, but God says, move. David said, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. He didn't say, though I sit there and you carry me across the way, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil because thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. You have to take the walk of faith and you have to take affirmative action in order to have God's will come to fruition. Now, you have to also remember that a branch that is pruned, those nutrients will go somewhere else, meaning somebody else can take your spot in the intended purpose that you were placed here to do. Many are called, few are chosen. And we have to choose to be chosen. It is an everyday choice. It is a constant agreement. It is a constant walk, a constant journey. It is a being. It is a nature. It is an identity to be one of God's chosen. It is very difficult to do, but it is dang well worth it. And it is a heck versus hell of a ride, I'll tell you that much. Um, really, I was chosen before I decided to be chosen. That is true. I was called. But in the same way, whenever someone says, okay, well, Jeremy Simmons, raise your hand, you have to choose to raise your hand. And you have to actually go up on the stage and do what they're asking you to do. You have to make that choice, or they're just going to call on somebody else. That's what God can do, because God can always produce fruits through other branches. And that's what the vine is. Okay? So choose your level in the understanding of checking your belief systems, checking what frequency you operate in. Of course, muting out different things and being more in prayer and meditation so you can allow yourself to be clear and hear God's word while also aligning and knowing God's will. But in that aspect as well, of making sure that you take the responsibility as the extension of God that you are. For if you really look at the Bible, what was created with the flesh was created, not the spirit, not the soul, not the identity that was created. That was breathed. God breathed life into us, and God's breath is eternal. So we are also eternal. Our flesh is not, as we very well know. Our flesh was created, right? Adam was the first one that was created, the first and only one that was created in the flesh. But we are eternal, the real us, the God identity us. But that is a constant choice that you have to remind yourself of. That is a constant decision that you have to always be making. And once you get to a point of having it so deeply instilled in your system, like Lex, great example, one of the best examples that I have ever came across, then it just becomes a part of you. Then we can really get on that level of walking like Christ. And that is one of the ultimate objectives. And I believe that's one of the most amazing things that you can do in this world is get to the point of walking on water, is get to the point of doing these things that Christ could do, of even the multiplication. Of course, God's help and through our faith. But that's the key too, is through our faith. So constantly choosing to have that level on the next, to constantly go and raise our status and raise our frequency, raise our understanding. And every time we elevate, every time we see things in God's ways, because God's ways are higher than our ways and God's thoughts are higher than our thoughts, that is what we have to become. That is what we have to do, is constantly raise our elevational standpoint, even whenever it comes to our mind. And even if it is just our mind, that is one of the most powerful things that we can do. So I love each and every one of you. Hope y'all have a blessed one. Whatever it is that you're listening to this, I love you all. Let's keep pumping these out. I know I take responsibility, but we will catch you on the flip side.